So we have a question. What do you do when things in your life get tough? Our next guest has taken one of the most heartbreaking things a woman can go through and turned it into comic strips for people in similar situations. So please help me welcome cartoonist Chari Pere to DBL.
Chari, hi there. So glad to meet you. You create what you call cartoonmentaries. Cartoonmentaries, I'm so good. Okay, to talk about some actually very, very difficult situations. And you started them with your own miscarriage. I wanted to ask you what made you decide to actually share your story and in that way.
Well, I've always been very open with my life, and I've discovered that if something bad happens to you, what's the point of going through it unless something good can come from it? So I've made comics throughout my career that help have positive messages. I try to use my cartoon powers for good. So I've worked on comics about abusive marriages and escaping them. I've done coloring books for kids with diabetes. I have a graphic novel about bully prevention. I've worked with author Gretchen Rubin to create a comic as a supplement to her Happiness Project, which was a #1 New York Times bestseller. So throughout my career, I really try to do good. So of course, when I had such a traumatic situation, it was natural for me to want to use it to turn it into a good purpose.
And did sharing that help you process your own experience?
Absolutely. I feel like as soon as I put my pen to digital paper, it really took all the pain, the emotional pain, and transformed it into something else. I created the resource that I didn't have 10 years ago when I went through my situation, and I was alone, and I had a toddler, and my husband was out of town, and the internet was not a place that helped me. So I created the resource that I hope is helpful for other women.
Unbelievable.
Well, Big Bang Theory star Mayim Bialik shared your first comic, and the comments started flooding in. So how did it feel knowing that so many women shared a similar situation?
Well, at first it was really frustrating because until I started talking, I didn't know how common it was that 1 in 4 pregnancies ended up in a miscarriage. I found out my own mom thinks she had a miscarriage and didn't realize it. So, you know, I'm glad that there's strength in numbers and that the community of people, we're part of a club that we don't want to be a part of. So it's nice to know that there are other people there going through what I'm going through and I'm not alone. But, you know, it's, like I said, I try to create a resource that brings people together, and it's really, I'm sorry that it's something that's useful to people, but I'm glad that my comics and now my animated cartoon series is doing its purpose and helping people feel less alone.
Good for you. It's such a community, a very much needed one at that. And you have since created the Unspoken series and told stories of 2 other people, a man who experienced his wife's miscarriage and a pregnant woman who received a Down syndrome diagnosis for her baby. How do you take on other people's stories?
Well, the expansion of the project came out in a really funny way. A couple of days after Mayim had shared my comic, I was telling my husband, who's the editor on my project, my husband Eli Schiff, he's the editor, he's the co-producer of my animated shorts and the voiceovers on it. And so I was telling him, you know, as little as women talk about miscarriages, I should really consider doing a comic from a husband's perspective, because as little as women talk about miscarriages, men don't really voice their opinions at all.
Right.
And later, I got an email from a fan telling me, you know, you should really consider doing a comic from a husband's perspective, because my husband really struggled, and that turned into Michael's miscarriage. And I realized there's so many unspoken topics that are there, you know, so I tackled a Down syndrome diagnosis, and the ultimate plan is to expand the project to tackle stillbirth, secondary infertility, postpartum depression. Unfortunately, there's so many issues, and I would love to give a voice to everybody suffering so that in their situation they have a resource to let them feel that they're in it with someone else and they can get through it.
Wow.
I'm so happy that we're talking to you, and you're kind of voicing what I've always thought but never said, because I thought it would hit people's ears wrong. But I don't think that art can be created without trauma. I don't think it's possible. If you think about stand-up comedy, you think about Amy Winehouse, you think about Van Gogh, you think about Tupac. There has to be, hip-hop came from the inner city's falling apart and people crying out for help. So what you're doing is so important. So I want to ask you, in your opinion, I've been doing comedy for 20 years. How can comedy help people heal from trauma? And let's be honest, is anything off limits?
Well, you know, I tackle very different. I have a background in comedy as well, but for this project, it's a little bit more serious. But I try to, you know, comedy is a way to digest very difficult topics. So even in my comics and my animations, I have little bits of humor and lightheartedness, and I create a style that's I hope universally friendly so that it's easily digestible. And as for something, humor is subjective, right? So something that works for me might not work for you and vice versa. So I really don't know if there's anything that can be off limits, because what's off limits for me might be not off limits for someone else.
Absolutely.
No, that's a very healthy perspective. Well, I think more people need to adopt that. Chari, thank you so much for being here.
I love this.
For sharing your story to our audience. You can read Chari's Unspoken series at charipere.com. You can also contribute to the continuation of the series by buying merch on her website. Congratulations. Thank you so much, Chari.
Bravo.
Thank you.